Um, Alan, I think we can get started if you're okay with that. So
Yes.
hello and welcome to our Mission Control webinar today. This is an ongoing series to show how you as a test sponsor can take control of the exam development process. So you can create or scale up your certification program and build new high quality exams more quickly. If you missed any of our earlier sessions on item writing and review, beta testing, standard setting, or psychometrics, you can find those recordings on our website, or you can also just reach out to any of us here at Certiverse. My name is Abby Attia, and I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Certiverse. I'm here today with our Chief Psychometrician, Alan Mead.
Is that my cue?
That
Take it
is
away.
not your cue, not yet. This series is presented by Certiverse. If you're not yet familiar, we are an all-in-one end-to-end online exam development and delivery platform. With Certiverse, our overall goal is to transform the industry using technology, making it more equitable by removing significant time and cost obstacles for test sponsors such as yourselves. Our award-winning technology is designed to make every step of creating a test more efficient, more inclusive, less costly, and easier on the environment. We would love to tell you more about how we do that, so just let us know after the webinar or visit certiverse.com and schedule a time to talk with any one of us. Next slide, Alan, please. Our goal is to keep this presentation to half an hour, and we have a lot of ground to cover. So we're going to ask that you put any questions you may have in the Q&A section, either directed to everyone or just the host and panelists, however you'd like to do that, if you'd rather be anonymous. And then we will address them at the end of the session. And as I said earlier, when you were all joining, we'd love to see you interacting. So perhaps tell us something you hope to hear about today or what challenges you're currently facing in your JTA processes. And with that, let's get started. And Alan, could you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about your background?
Thanks, Abby. So, hi everyone. Actually, this is our second JTA, second webinar in job analysis, and I'm the chief psychometrician at Certiverse, and my background is actually as an industrial psychologist. One of the topics that industrial psychologists study is job analysis. So this is an area that's near and dear to my heart. And today's webinar will have an introduction to job analysis if you're not familiar with it. That probably repeats some of the things we said previously. And but I'll focus on some of the innovations that we've introduced, some of which, maybe you'll use our platform, some of which might be things that you'd be able to implement in your system if you didn't use our platform. And I'm going to talk about how you could perform JTA in about a week, which I think is pretty quick, and then we'll take your questions. So that's our agenda. So if you're not familiar with job analysis is a method to determine the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics, the KSAOs, that are necessary to perform effectively in a job or a role. And and most certification exams focus on knowledge, skills, and abilities. So probably you might hear people talk about KSAs, and KSAs are basically like competencies. They're the things that people need to have. And so another way to put it is that a job analysis or a role analysis tells you what your certification exam should cover, and also the relative weights of those topics on the exam. And so you need a job analysis when you are trying to decide what content to put on your test blueprint for creating a test, or you need to defend that as job related, or you feel like it's not grounded in what people are actually doing. Job analysis would be a way to evidence what people are actually doing and ensure that your program is focused on what people are actually doing in the work or the job or the role. Also, we don't do performance exams, at least not right now. But if you're creating performance exams, job analysis is a wonderful way to find out, exactly what the tools look like that the candidate is going to use or something like that. So job analysis has a number of purposes. And one of the things I wanted to emphasize is that for most exams, most certification exams, most of the time, the main defense of the exam, of the validity of the exam, is that it's job related. And job analysis is the methodology for showing that the exam is job related. So for most of you, most of the time, the main defense of the validity of your exam will be the job analysis. And there's some times when you don't need it. You know, if you've done a job analysis recently, then you probably don't need to do another one. That probably depends on how fast the job is changing. But typically, we assume that job analyses have a shelf life of years, maybe 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. If your exam is going to be based on instructional material, then it's entirely appropriate for you to base the blueprint on that instructional material. So the instructional material would take the place of the job analysis. You don't need to do a job analysis. However, if you're concerned that your curriculum is job related, then job analysis is the ideal way to ensure that your curriculum is related and therefore your exam. There are also circumstances where the exam content is determined by legislation or some other process, and there are instances where the exam covers something fairly narrow, like if you were to develop a test of Microsoft Word, then you might not need a job analysis. You could use one to determine which features are most commonly used, but it would be more common to define it based on the generally accepted features of Word. And so there are some circumstances where job analysis is not actually necessary. And there are many types. Saying job analysis is a misnomer because there's actually lots of different ways to go about doing a job analysis, and none of them are inherently better or worse. There are task-based job analysis, and I'll talk about the terminology that our system uses, that Certiverse uses, is most naturally associated with tasks, and you'll hear job task analysis, or JTA, mentioned, and that looks at what incumbents do in the role, the tasks that they do, and then you infer the KSAs from that. Or you could go directly to trying to address the knowledge, what do candidates need to know, or the skills, what skills do they need, or the competencies, which are probably a little bit higher level than skills or knowledge. And so there's different kinds of job analysis from that perspective. And then there's different methodologies. You could do interviews. You could talk to people and base your job analysis on interviews. You could go observe the job and see what they do as opposed to what they tell you to do. Surveys are very popular, and that's a methodology that we'll talk about a lot today. And then you can do focus groups, and you could combine more than one of these. And there's no inherently correct or incorrect. But you know, all of the other methods aside from surveys tend to be fairly expensive. To fly to the location and observe the job, or to do interviews or focus groups, is a relatively expensive process. So Certiverse supports statement-based survey job analyses, and our terminology is oriented around task-based, but you could easily write knowledge-based tasks or skill-based tasks or competency-based tasks. So we can accommodate any of these as long as the main modality would be a survey. Oh, and that doesn't mean that you can't also do interviews. We just don't have any specific support for that, and you would have to add that to, say, a tech report along with the results from our platform. And let's face it, job analysis is not seen as a quick or cheap process. It's SME driven, and it requires a fair amount of time. So both of those things tend to make it costly. And realistically, a job analysis is typically done to defend the exam, that it's job related. And so you're typically doing it for an audience outside the exam program. You're typically doing it for not for the insiders of the exam program, but to demonstrate that the exam program has validity for people outside the exam program. And so it can seem kind of onerous for the people, the subject matter experts who are involved. Now, Certiverse looked at this and they said, what could we do to make this process more efficient? And it's important to note that our efficiencies are incremental efficiencies. We have not done anything that removes any traditional step. So somebody once asked me, how do you defend an exam created on Certiverse? And I said, well, how do you defend an exam that you create? We go through the same processes. We just have some advantages that I think make the process more efficient, and I'll talk about those. And then I'll show you how you could do a job analysis in about a week. So these are the advantages that I think we have. The first is that we have a structured framework with automation. So you know what step one is, you know what step two is, and you're never waiting for Jeff to get back from a conference so that the materials can go from step one to step two. They automatically move forward. Our system has the automation in our system has the same advantage that makes automated payroll systems better, or automated order processing systems better. And our system is designed that subject matter experts can participate remotely and asynchronously. So they can participate when and where they are, as opposed to needing to come to a particular meeting. Now, our system is flexible. If you want to fly everybody to Chicago and have a 2-day meeting, and they can still use our platform to do it, but that's not necessary. One innovation that we have, and I'll show you an example of this, is that we infer the KSAs immediately. And I think that that makes a difference. And I'll talk a little bit about that. We also have some AI-based coaching. And the consequence of that is that you don't need a lengthy training for the subject matter experts before they can write well-formed statements like task statements or knowledge statements. The system is encouraging them to write well-formed statements while they're writing it, and consequently, they don't need as much training. And then there's automation in the survey creation. The survey creation, I'll show you a video of creating a survey on the Certiverse platform. It takes 2 minutes. The analysis takes even less time. It is automatic. It's just there. And then you can press a button and create an initial draft blueprint. And I'll talk about what you need to do to finish that blueprint and make it polished. But those are the advantages that our system has. This is what I meant by KSA inferences occur immediately. This is a psychometrician job analysis, and let's say it's a task-based job analysis. So these are tasks that a psychometrician does, like analyze exam data, analyze JTA survey data, manage itemizers. And we've asked the subject matter experts to tag those tasks with KSA domains. So two tags of analysis have been added, JTA and management. So we asked the subject matter experts to add the KSAs immediately at the same time they're creating the statements. And I think that that has some advantages in terms of the efficiency of the overall process. But what would traditionally happen is you would write your statements, you would put them on a JTA survey, you administer the JTA survey, and then after that, you would take the important tasks and you would have another meeting with the subject matter experts where you'd ask them, okay, well, what's a KSA that you need to do analyze exam data or analyze JTA survey data? So it's not that we're saving you a step, we're just reordering it, which I think actually improves the efficiency of things. So this is an example of the AI coaching. This is a nursing exam, a hypothetical nursing exam with tasks that a nurse would do. And our system will automatically check to make sure that the statement is well formed. So for example, apparently we don't have triage because it's giving a little warning that it doesn't know about this as whether it's an action verb. And here's another example, maybe a bad example, because create daily patient charts, probably daily is an important part of that and valid to have in. But we scan the tasks for words that refer to frequency in order to alert the subject matter expert in case it's inappropriate. Because in the next step, we're going to create a JTA survey, and one of the common rating scales would be the frequency with which you perform these tasks. And if there was a frequency word in the task, it would bias the results inappropriately. So we have a series of checks that we do. We check the length, make sure it's not too short, make sure it's not too long. And when I say that we can automatically create a draft blueprint, this is the preview that you see in the JTA. So immediately this is available to you whenever you have data in the system, and it's telling you that domain 1 should be 22%, domain 2 should be 35%. That's the biggest domain, and so on and so forth. And this turns naturally into a draft blueprint like this, hypothetically for a computer programmer, where these tags are based on the KSA domain tags that the SMEs have provided, and it's automatically calculated. And I'll talk about what you need to do beyond having this initial draft blueprint to finalize it. So how would you do job analysis in a week? I think the first step is that you need a super SME. And a super SME is a subject matter expert. SME means subject matter expert, who is an administrator and who has the perspective of both being able to understand the exam content and also make decisions about the exam program. So I'll refer to a super SME. And I think without a super SME, this process probably wouldn't be as efficient. And so you could still do this process, but it might take a little bit longer for, like say, a panel of SMEs with a facilitator to reach the same conclusions. So the first step would be for the super SME to come in and seed task statements. And this isn't absolutely necessary, but this way, the interface that the subject matter experts will see on the next day already has some well-formed statements that already set the tone and that probably already have some domains. So they're not starting from scratch, they're starting from a basis. And this improves the process quite a bit. And these particular statements for a hypothetical psychometric assistant exam, I took off ONET. It took me about an hour to see them. The main thing was copying and pasting off ONET and adding these domain tags. So I think that's an efficient process for seating and exams to start with an approximation from ONET and then to add it. And the next step would be to ask SMEs to come to your system, probably a fairly small number of them, and to review this list of tasks or knowledge statements or competencies, and to refine them, to suggest things that are missing, and to make it a good set of statements for the survey. And that step could take as long as you give them. I think that they could reasonably take a set of seeded tasks and turn it into a good set of tasks in a couple days if they were primed and ready to go. The next step isn't absolutely necessary, but I think the super SME should go in and curate the domains. And I'll show you exactly what I mean by this. And the reason for doing that is that allows you to create a draft blueprint that is closer to the final version. So everything that happens after that happens with a well-organized set of domain tags. If you don't do this step here, you could just skip this step. You just have to do it at a later point. It adds more time to organizing the blueprint. So here is a video of me curating the psychometric assistant JTA list. First thing I do is look at how many tasks are associated with each of the domain tags. And there's one that has 0. I don't like that, so I delete that. And then I don't like a domain that only has a single task. So missing data treatment only has 1 task. And I look at the list, and data cleaning is pretty similar to that. So I merge those two together. And everything updates automatically. The domains within the associated with the tasks update. And then there's still item analysis. That seems kind of important, and there's only 2 statements. But if you look at the list, there's exam analysis that has more statements, and probably those 2 should go together as some analysis domain. So I merge those 2 together and change the name here in a second to analysis. And so that is one example of curating the domain. And I did this, what has this been, about a minute and a half. Probably a subject matter expert will take a little bit more time to do that, but it's something they can do in a day or less. Then you can publish a survey. I'm going to show you a video of me publishing a survey in 2 minutes. So it doesn't take very much time at all. And I'm going to show you that right now. So we start with the task that I just showed you curating. We switch to the survey tab, and we can edit the various aspects. So here I'm going to make some minor edits to the welcome screen, excuse me, and make sure that they're a subject matter expert for this topic. And I'm going to save that. You don't have to make these modifications. I'm really just doing this to demonstrate that you can easily make modifications. You can add background questions. You can add demographics. We allow you to add or remove those. We don't allow you to edit them because that would make it less efficient. You can edit the rating scales, though. You can delete frequency if you don't need frequency. We're not going to do that here. You can edit the thank you screen. And then we're about to launch the exam. There we go. The exam is launched. Maybe previewing it before I launched it would have been a good idea. And then you can create a generic survey link, and you can send that. You can Slack that to your subject matter experts. Or you can go in and you can have the system directly invite a subject matter expert. Here I'm inviting myself with my private email. So once I complete the JTA survey, you'll see my status on the right-hand side there. So that is how you launch a survey in our system. And that's literally what I mean by it being automated and taking very little time. So the next step is to get your JTA participants to take the survey and to give you feedback. And it's always challenging to get enough people to take any survey. I'm assuming you've recruited your sample. We typically observe that there are waves of responses that happen right after an email goes out. So when you initially invite people, you'll get some wave of data. And if you really want to fit this JTA into a week, you can't give them very much time, and you'd probably have to go ahead with that small sample or do something to prime them to be ready to take it and move forward with a small sample. And I've got something to say about that. If you can't use a small sample, if you can't collect the data in 2 days, that's fine. But that means you can't do the JTA in a week. If you're going to give them a week to respond or 2 weeks, then that means that you can do your JTA in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. If you can take the window that you allow the survey to be open and add less than a week, and you can fit your JTA within that time period. The issue of small samples, this gets into sort of a researchy thing. So there's some chance that I could get carried away talking about it, but this represents a simulation that explains a phenomenon that many psychometricians have noticed that breaks our empirical hearts, that the sample size doesn't matter that much. So what these squiggly lines are is they are domain weights. So this domain is the most important domain at about a quarter of the content of the exam. And this domain is the second most important at somewhere between 15 and 20%, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of domains down here that are very small. And I've calculated those weights after 0 people have taken the survey. So I have a way of estimating the weights before anybody takes the survey. After 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, all the way up to 120 people have taken the survey. And the overall character of these lines, other than the very beginning, is that they're fairly flat. These little bumps mean that the domain weight stayed the same for 1 person, then it went up a percentage point, then down a point, then stayed the same for a long time, and went up and down. So these lines are fairly flat, and that means that wherever this chaos ends, maybe around 6 to 10 people, if you have a sample size that's bigger than that, then the weight isn't changing very much. It doesn't really matter how many people you have between 10 people and 40 people and 100 people and 120 people. The weight that you're getting is substantially the same across all those numbers of people. And in fact, I can predict the weight based on, there's a mathematical structure to the JTA that causes a strong influence on the weight. And I can predict the weight before anybody responds to the survey. So my prediction was that this domain would be about 23%, and after collecting 120 people, it's about 26%. So I guess it's up to you to decide whether collecting 120 people is necessary to move from a weight of 23% to a weight of 26%. I think that I'm going to create an animation where instead of these squiggly lines, I show you a pie chart that shows you the domains, but I don't have that animation. And as you add people to your sample, the pie chart wedges would change, and I think you'd see they change very little. They change very little from the initial position based on a prediction with 0. And there's a strong mathematical reason why that's true. Now, if you were going to show this to an accreditation board, I don't know what they would say about predicting based on 0 sample or 5 people. There are also some assumptions I'm making that you don't have distinct heterogeneity in your sample and some other assumptions, but I don't think the sample size matters a great deal. But if it does, then you'll have to allow adequate time for the sample size, and you won't be able to do JTA in 1 week. The analysis happens automatically. This is our system analysis of the JTA, where we're estimating the criticality, the mean criticality for each task. And one of the things I do is I sort the tasks by that mean criticality. And we see here that perform literature searches and summarize papers is not going to be critical based on our threshold of 3. And 3 is pretty common, it's the midpoint. And what I do is I look at the tasks that are going to be lost, so to speak. Lost is, I use that term, and I see whether or not I would prefer that they not be lost, and I might adjust the threshold to say 2.7 to include this. But there isn't very much to do manually in this analysis. And then you can immediately see a preview of what the blueprint will look like in terms of the weights associated with each of the domains. And then this is a rather abstract illustration of what you need to do next. They'll have a bunch of domains, and let's say there's 20 of them. There's 20 points on this graph. You need to look for the ones that are most similar. So these 2 might be the most similar. So those would go together. And these 2 are most similar, and those would go together. And pretty soon you have these groups. And so, okay, these 4 should go into domain 1. I should demote them from being topics to being subtopics of a new domain that I define that covers all of these. And that's the main job of the organizer. And so that and adding good descriptions to the subtopics are what take about a day. So that's about the last piece of work, is organizing the blueprint. The blueprint might have told you that the basics of software development should be 31%, but a SME came in and said, okay, well, that's a big percentage. So let's provide some more detail. Let's add these, and let's give them roughly equal weights. And let's, most importantly, add these descriptions to those. And that would give you a final polished blueprint that you could use for item writing. So these are the steps that you could do if you can live with a small sample, or if you can find a way to get an adequate sample in a couple of days, you can do a job analysis in a week. And so the summary for my webinar is that job analysis is an important tool. It's important for demonstrating validity. We have some innovations that make what is typically considered a time-consuming and expensive task somewhat less time-consuming and expensive. It's conceivable that you could do a job analysis in a week, or if you can't live with tiny samples, maybe those assumptions don't apply to you, then you can do a job analysis in the survey window time plus 1 week. So if you leave the survey open for 2 weeks, you could do a job analysis in 3 weeks. And I think I am out of time and out of slides.
We are almost right at time, but we have perfect timing because we have 2 minutes left and we have 2 questions. But just to let everyone know, we will stay on after time is up. If you have additional questions or additional discussion, we understand if you have to leave, but this webinar is being recorded, so you can always come back to it to hear some more discussion or answers to these questions. So, Alan, the first question we have is the system saving versions of the tasks and domains before and after being curated by an SME or program administrator? So I think this refers to when you're potentially merging things. Is that all retained?
The answer is that the system doesn't currently automatically retain that. You can download it, so you can manually manage that and have whatever level of documentation you want. But the purpose of the system, I would describe it as trying to get to a good set of statements that you can put on the JTA survey. So it doesn't automatically version the statements or the changes.
Okay. And the next question we have is, if you're creating a brand new exam, for example, role-based certification, you might not have an established super SME. So how would you go about organizing and editing those initial tasks without a super SME?
So if you didn't have a super SME, you could do all the tasks that we talked about with a committee of SMEs and with somebody like a psychometrician or exam developer facilitating them to make those decisions. But I think that you'll find that that process is a little bit less efficient. You don't have that. Many of these processes are creative in the sense that authoring something is a creative process. And so having a single person who can oversee that is a strong guiding factor. But you could do it with a committee, but it will take a little bit more time, and you'll probably have to schedule some meetings to do that. And scheduling a meeting always makes the process less efficient.
Yep. All right, great. And again, perfect timing. We are right at 1:30 Eastern time, 12:30 Central. So if there are any further questions, feel free to reach out to us at this email here, or you can also go to our website, and there's plenty of ways to get in touch with us there. So we appreciate your attendance, and thank you all very much.
Thanks.